My first guest today is Andi Hoxhaj, OBE. For those of you that don't know, an OBE is the second highest ranking that can be awarded to a person by the King, by the royal family of the United Kingdom. Now, this was announced at the end of 2023, but it was formalised by Prince William, the future King of England, very recently. Now, I'm proud to say Andi is a regular on the show, and I've invited him today for a slightly longer chat than usual to discuss several matters on the agenda. Andi, welcome to Inside Albania.
I'm delighted to be here, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Yes.
It's always a pleasure to have you, and especially under such exciting circumstances this time. Very recently, you received your OBE formally. So this was announced in the New Year's Honours List, and then you had a very lovely ceremony with Prince William as the future King of England. And this is, I mean, it's a great example of one of the many Albanians who've gone to the UK and made a positive difference to the country. How has the reaction been from Albanians in Albania to this very impressive news? And have you had any sort of congratulations from the government or any official figures?
The news has been very, very positive, and I'm sort of delighted for our community, although this is a personal honor, but I consider it as sort of a recognition for the positive impact that our community does in the UK. I've received a number of private messages, and the Albanian embassy in London hosted quite a lovely reception with a number of guests where we were not only celebrating sort of some of our achievement, but it was also a good opportunity for us to kind of discuss what can we do moving forwards in terms of deepening the ties, both academically, culturally, as well as in other fields. And that has been quite nice. But it's really good to be recognized. But equally, there are a number of challenges, and I think we can address them. And I think we are moving in sort of the right direction.
That actually brings me on to the next topic. David Cameron visited Tirana, and there were British flags everywhere. There was pictures of his face, you know, bigger, taller than me, hanging around. I mean, it was all very exciting. He met the Prime Minister. He was supposed to meet the President, but his visit was cut short. I think he spent about 2.5 hours in Tirana, and then he flew back to the UK due to developments in the UK, the calling of a general election for the start of July. Do you think this was an issue? Do you think it creates a bad sort of image in the context of rather complex UK and Albania relations? But I also want to ask you as well, the second part of the question, he talked about a decrease in the small boat crossings, which were an issue sort of 1.5 years, 2 years ago. Do you think this is due to work between the two governments, or a natural decrease because there's just not enough people to keep this going indefinitely?
So in terms of the first part of the question, I was personally and particularly delighted to see the Foreign Secretary visiting Albania, and Albania rightly put the red carpet and made quite a big deal out of it, as they usually do for a big visit in that magnitude. However, it's quite unfortunate that he had to cut the visit short, and I do know that there was over 3 weeks preparation for his visit, and he was supposed to not meet only with the president, but also with the NGOs, with civil society, media, and unfortunately, that has left a bit of a bad taste. I think the sort of general reaction also in the UK as well as in the Albania is that when it comes to the Western Balkans, sometimes these sort of things happen, because if we remember last time when the UK hosted the Western Balkan Summit in London, the Foreign Secretary at the time was Boris Johnson, but he decided to resign in the morning, and the Western Balkan leaders were waiting for him to arrive. And then Theresa May, the Prime Minister at the time, was ushered in to welcome them. So I think that has left. On the other hand, take it with a light-hearted that these things sort of happen in a democracy, and unfortunately, there is a political crisis in the UK. It has been looming for quite some time, and everyone sort of was a bit surprised that Prime Minister Sunak called a general election yesterday, because he hasn't been able to command the majority within the Conservative Party in the last few weeks, especially being defeated in some of the bills that he put forward in the Commons. And it was not only David Cameron that was called back, but there were a number of ministers. When it comes to the second part of your question in terms of cutting the number of small boats and cooperation. Now, of course, there's not a clear methodology whether we can contribute and attribute it to the good relation, but it has definitely played a really important part.
We can expect, I think it's fair to say at the moment, that the government is probably going to change after July how things appear to be lying at the moment. If there is a change of government from Conservative to Labour, can we expect any different approach to the relations with Albania and migration? Or do you expect the same line to sort of continue?
I think it would be interesting to develop one thing I could say when it comes to the case of the UK, both the Conservative and the Labour. When it comes to Albania, they're pretty consistent in terms of the relation, that they have a positive attitude that we need to work with Albania. They do recognize that there is a large Albanian community in the UK, as well as their contribution. What we might see with the Labour government a shift of tone, where they will be more constructive. So far, they've seemed to be more constructive in that sense. The Labour Party generally has a really good relationship with Albania, and Albanians generally are supportive of the Labour Party. That's partially of the role that Tony Blair played when it comes to liberating Kosovo. But when it comes to the case of migration, there will not be much of a change, because if you see both plans, the Conservative and the Labour, in substance, they're very similar. However, the way that they're being presented and the way they're being talked about it is slightly different. So I would not see quite much of a change.
Now, I want to talk to you next about the proposed UK-Albania partnership between the School of Magistrates of Albania and the Judicial Office of England and Wales. Now, can you explain that to our viewers in a way which is a bit more accessible? What exactly is on the table here, and what solution is it providing?
So just to sort of take you a little bit back, when both prime ministers signed an agreement, at that time, we were invited to discuss a little bit what that agreement should be. Part of the recommendations that I proposed and a number of colleagues were to include an educational component where we can bring in more exchange of knowledge between different fields. And the best way forward that we can do it is to do it through education. And what we proposed in the table, this is one of the proposals, is to have an exchange between different professional schools in Albania, and that then can be expanded to university. Because we fundamentally believe if you have an exchange of practice, of best practice, you can actually break some of the culture barriers, but also some of the unconscious biases. Now, we well know that judges, prosecutors, police do have some culture biases when it comes to case law, that it's proven across the board, both in Albania, UK, and so on. But having those exchange will challenge some of those preconception as well as barriers. Now, what the substance of this sort of agreement that we have on the table, and this is one of those agreements, it's to provide an exchange between British judges and Albanian judges where they can share knowledge and best practice when it comes to case law. That will help, in particular, Albania to build its capacities when it comes to the rule of law and the judiciary, given that Albania has gone through a comprehensive vetting process and it has a number of shortcomings. We hope then that sort of a program then can be expanded between the College of Policing in the UK and the Albania Security Academy, where we could also have that exchange of best practices through education. And that way we can build the knowledge, the capacity, but also to provide more exchange between people to people.
I also just wanted to ask your view on the vetting process. I've been following the vetting process since I came in 2017. And I mean, the amount of judges that have resigned or been fired is very high. I'm not sure of the exact percentage at the moment, but the backlog of cases, I mean, with the Constitutional Court, with the Appeals Court, is in the tens of thousands, if I'm not mistaken. It's significant. Do you see the vetting process as a success in this context, or do you think we need a few more years to really understand, to get things in line and to be able to say, okay, we've made it out the other side?
Well, I think we have to see how do we measure success and what is, we do forget what were the criteria of the vetting process. So the criteria of the vetting process were to assess judges if they were corrupt or perceived to be corrupt or incompetent. Now, the general assumption was that about 30 to 32% were perceived as being either corrupt or incompetent. Now, the actual numbers show that 52% were kicked out because of these stringent criteria. So it was more than 25% which they had assumed. And that has created that sort of shortfall. Now, one could argue, well, this wasn't really a right approach to do it, because we could see that now the system, it's completely paralyzed because only 48% so far managed to go through the vetting process. On the other hand, do we really wanted them to be on board? Now, when it comes to these shortcomings, what I think Albania could have done better, and perhaps this is something that the EU should learn, because the EU at the moment has proposed a similar reform to Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, and we see their opinion by the Commission is actually mentioned that they should continue with their vetting process and develop a vetting process. What they should have done is that the School of Magistrates should have been the first one to reform, and should have been the first one to have the capacity to observe new students and put them through training so that could take those positions. Now, in Albania, we started straight away with the vetting process, and then now we see that for the system to be fully capable, again, we need 5 or 7 years to be filled of those processes. So I think we should leave it at time. I think it's going into the right direction. Again, depending which criteria you want to have a look at it. But if we go back to the criteria that were set out, it's kind of giving those results. However, the backlog, it is really problematic, and you have about 37,000 cases in the High Court, and on average, it will take at least 3.7 years for a case, and especially when it comes to cases on employment, it's just not acceptable, because if you are unfairly dismissed, you can only get about 6 weeks, I think 6 months or wages back. But if you're waiting 4 years, then what's the point? So a lot of people are kind of skipping that process.